Welcome back. Panelists here: Eddie Glaude Jr. of Princeton University, Danielle Pletka of the American Enterprise Institute, NBC News correspondent Heidi Przybyla, and Peter Baker, Chief White House correspondent for the New York Times. Let me start with this, Peter. I'm starting with Rich Lowry, but you essentially had a similar theme to what Rich wrote on Friday, which is this, what we open our show with. Never has history felt less consequential. The impending impeachment of President Donald Trump is, as news accounts and blaring newspaper headlines tell us, historic. This is true by definition, since a president has been impeached only twice before in 230 years. Ultimately, impeachment is going to get swallowed up by the news cycle like everything else.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, 21 years ago, when they impeached President Bill Clinton, it felt like that was the biggest story in the history of the world. Everything had stopped spinning on its axis for a while. This just feels like another chapter in the Trump story. We've been sort of at DEFCON 1 or DEFCON 5, whichever it is.
Since Election Day.
Since Election Day,
or
right?
Access Hollywood Day.
3 years of intensity, nonstop, hurricane, gale, force, conflict in Washington. And this just feels like yet another chapter in that rather than something unique.
So I think that's where our role as the media is important, to point out where we are, take a pause, this moment in history. This president is about to become the first president in the history of this nation who will be impeached for violating one of the founders' most primal fears, which is inviting foreign involvement into our elections. We all saw it. We saw it on the South Lawn. We saw it in the call summary. So the only question now really is how the public is going to respond. The outcome is preordained in the Senate. He will be acquitted. They may have a trial, short trial, long trial. He'll be acquitted. And then the question is, a year from now, how are voters going to respond to that? There's only one certainty, and that is we're going to have more information coming out. Right. We've got all of these court cases winding their way through on his tax returns, on all of the documents from State Department and OMB that are being withheld. We've not heard from any of the people who are in his immediate inner circle. That could all change in a year. And the question is going to be, who's going to be more angry? Trump's base, right, who believes that he was exonerated, or the Democratic base who believes that he walked? I don't think we know yet, because it's also not going to be the only factor that goes into the election.
You've set up, though, we're already in the battle of the aftermath, I feel like. Right, Eddie and Danny? Eddie?
So, one thing, let's pan out for a minute, just for a second. The aftermath is that we're going to have a particular understanding of the executive branch, its power. If Trump survives this, which he will, right, if it turns out that impeachment has no sting, has no bite, and we're in the aftermath, what it will mean is that there will be an imperial executive branch that can do whatever it wants to do. I don't know what Congress's power will look like. So I'm just talking about at the level of checks and balances. By the way,
we don't know what he will do with it either.
Right. So
he may also feel chagrined, unlikely.
So the idea that was informing Federalist 51, the idea that informed our very system of checks and balances, right, I think, is in question after this. Maybe I'm being hyperbolic, but never know.
I think that imperial presidency should actually, that ship sailed a while ago. I really do. I mean, it was a problem under George W. Bush. It was a growing problem under Obama, and it has come to its apotheosis under Donald Trump. But I think what Heidi said, I think, is really important, because I think you neatly, although perhaps unintentionally, illustrated the divide between how you, or perhaps even we, see things here and how the rest of the world, or rather the rest of America, sees these things. They're seeing, want. Yeah, okay, we want to talk to John Bolton, we want to talk to Mulvaney, we want those papers. Yeah, he definitely did it. This is what he did. He broke the founders' most sacred vows about how our nation was to be run. Yeah, that's not what a lot of people think. And to the extent that they do, they either agree or disagree. But they're really not interested in all these details, and I think that
that comes back to the media, doesn't it?
But it goes further to the narrative that there's one side intent on persecuting the president and one side intent on not listening.
There's one other thing we have the party switch that's in the news today about the Democrat from New Jersey who's likely going to switch over this. About 3 months ago, we had Justin Amash who switched. Let's think about this. Neither member of Congress thought they could stay in their own party and criticize their party and disagree. That you had to leave the tribe. No matter what, you had to leave the tribe. That, to me, that the Democratic big tent's not big enough for somebody to be against impeachment. The Republican tent is not big enough to criticize this president and be for impeachment. What is that? I mean, that means it feels as if it's irreconcilable differences.
Our parties are more homogenous than they used to be, right? Our districts are designed so that your biggest threat as a member of the House is not from the other party, but from within your own party.
Which, with this Democratic congressman, Democrats are leaking all this poll numbers, say, look, this guy, simply by not voting for the impeachment inquiry, was going to get roasted in a primary, which is probably true. Justin Amash would have gotten roasted in a primary.
So the incentive structure has changed, right? 20 years ago, 30 years ago, there was an incentive to stand by somebody from the other party and say, hey, we've got this bipartisan legislation together. Even if it wasn't really bipartisan, you wanted the appearance of it, you would be rewarded for that. Today, it would be a punishment. And that has changed the incentive structure. You cannot drift from your party without penalty.
I think that is absolutely true in the House. I don't think we know yet how this is going to go down in the Senate, because we watched Senator Toomey, and I think there are still a number of Republicans like him who may want more than just each side presenting its case. Bring in some witnesses, because to Danielle's point, the reason why the public says want is because they didn't see a real trial. They saw grandstanding by partisans. In the Senate, there would be a real trial where they can't interrupt and they can't do.
But it's unlikely to see that.
Yeah.
But you did bring up a good point. I thought it was interesting, and I think it shows you there are vulnerable Republicans, right, who are uncomfortable with this too. He's like, don't get rid of this immediately.
Right.
I'm not even sure. I'm not sure yet I want no witnesses. Like he was not ready to say we know everything yet, which is why McConnell's trying to strike an odd balance here, I think.
Yeah, I don't, I think what McConnell said on Fox News to Hannity was unconscionable in terms of just simply being the Senate Majority Leader.
But he was trying to send Hannity's audience a message. I'm not calling Hunter Biden.
Right.
You're not playing your game.
Yes.
Because that's for Hannity, it's a game.
But I want to go back to the Democratic Party, though, in the sense that, remember, it took a minute for Nancy Pelosi to get here. There were folks within the Democratic Party who were not with the Al Greens, who weren't with Maxine Waters, who were actually making the case that we need more evidence. Impeachment's not a good thing. So I want to be very careful when we kind of make the equivalency that I think within the Democratic Party, there has been an ongoing debate between folks we used to call blue dog Democrats and progressive Democrats. And so it's a bigger tent. It's a bigger tent.
That closet meeting of the people, the conservative Democrats that used to be a huge, that used to be a caucus and is now,
and you know where the moderate Republicans meet? In the basement of the RNC in a small room. I actually have been there. There was plenty of room.
I don't want to know why you were there, Chuck. But Mitt Romney,
they couldn't get caught talking to me outside of the basement, I guess.
These are serious Susan Collins. These are serious people. They do want to hear it. But yeah, I think that for conclusion.
I'm going to end the topic here, but to remind people, after impeachment is all over, we're still going to get new information. Lev Parnas is under investigation, and I throw this out here. He lied to federal prosecutors, failed to disclose this $1 million transfer from Russian bank account. My point is, after impeachment is over, new information is going to come out that may help determine who, quote unquote, wins this post-impeachment political battle. Hello from Washington, I'm Chuck Todd, and thanks for checking out the Meet the Press channel on YouTube. Click on the button down here to subscribe, and click over here to watch the latest interviews, highlights, and other digital exclusives.